Hello and welcome to Monsters, Myths, and Mayhem. I'm Silver.
I'm Chaotic. There was a long pause there. I wasn't sure what we were doing here.
That's okay. Brain's overheating.
Yeah, it'd be like that.
Today, as it is October, we're doing our specials. This year's specials is fairy tales. Old fairy tales that we, just like. We're just going to share them. They might be monster related, they might not.
Either way, I'm sure there's some kind of creepy factor in all of them because they tend to be very creepy when they're old.
Today's story, as you guys might know by the title, The Little Mermaid. It is written by Hans Christian Andersen, a Danish author, back in 1837, as part of a collection of fairy tales for children. I tried to read it earlier, and I got 404 in the brain. So, Chaot's going to give this a try.
Okay, so like Silver said, we are doing The Little Mermaid. So instead of reading you guys all 15 pages of this, we're going to be recapping. So this is just going to be little snippets here. This one is the one by Hans Christensen, yes?
Christian Andersen, yes.
Christian Andersen. So Hans Christian Andersen. It was published in 1837, and it's kind of crazy. So just from the beginning, so the king, as you all know him, the Little Mermaid's father, was a widower. His own mother was a very wise woman, and she was very, very proud, and she had a very high birth. She wore 12 oysters on her tail, while most others only wore 6. She was very deserving of that praise. She took care of all little sea princesses, and those that were her granddaughters. There were 6 of them. Obviously, we are here to talk about the youngest. She was the most fair, the prettiest, delicate. She had beautiful blue eyes. And she kind of embodied everything that the king wanted out of, what you think of your most ideal child. Their home was essentially made of living flowers, huge windows, fishes just in and out. The fishes, trusted the princesses. We've got the very casual animals always flock to the princesses type ordeal. Each of the princesses had like their own little part in the garden, and they were allowed to dig and do whatever they wanted. It looks like one of them arranged their flower beds into the shape of a whale, which is very cute. Some of them did like the sun. Others did like rays or like sunset. And the youngest child, who was the strangest, the biggest dreamer, carved hers into. It was essentially a boy, like a handsome young man, and was carved out of white stone. Which if you guys watch Disney movies, he's already got that, and it's just something she like obsesses over. She was just strange from the beginning. She really liked to know like what was outside of the realm of just their home, of their seas, and she always was curious about like going to the surface. When she was 15, her grandmother told her she would have permission to go up and look or sit on the rocks at the moonlight to see all the great ships and forests, towns, things like that, see things above the water. So the oldest sister got to go up first, obviously, and it kind of went down the row. All of them were excited about it. They loved going. It was very pleasing to them. They always wanted to get back in the water, though. They always felt like it was much more beautiful below. They enjoyed their home. They loved the sea. And for the most part, they would just kind of go up all together and like wrap their arms around each other. They'd sing. And when they expected a ship would kind of go under or tip, they would sing in the depths, and they would beg the sailors not to fear if they sank to the bottom. The sailors couldn't understand the song. It was kind of like lost in the winds of the storm, but it was always beautiful for them to do. And if the ship sank and the men were drowned, the dead bodies alone would reach the palace of the Sea King, which is kind of crazy. Apparently, in this story, mermaids don't have any tears, which is also wild. She reached the sixth sister, the youngest one, reached her 15th year, and she was allowed to go up with like her sisters were. The grandma ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess. That's pretty awesome. And she was like, yo, these hurt. I'm not even lying. That's what she says. She says, but these hurt me so. So, yo, these hurt is exact, like translation for you guys. And the grandma was basically like, for pride, you have to suffer through pain, like whatever. She was super excited. She got up there. The air was mild. There was a large ship with 3 masts. She laid there for a while. There was music. She could hear them playing songs. As it got darker, there was like 100 colored lanterns on the ship. She was very excited about it. She got really close to the cabin windows and she watched. She couldn't see through the glass window panes, so the waves would kind of lift her up, and she'd see people dancing. A lot of them looked like they were younger, but there was one in particular, like a young prince, who had very dark eyes, and he was about 16, and it was his birthday, so they were all dancing and having fun and celebrating him. She was so startled when they shot the like rockets, like the fireworks into the air, that she dipped underwater. It appeared as if the stars were falling around her like heaven, which is such a unique like description of seeing something like that for the first time. And she really just ended up enjoying viewing this young prince, this young man who is so handsome. Then, shortly after all of that, there was a deadly storm coming. It was kind of big. The waves were getting higher. The sky was getting darker. There was like foam happening on the waves. And she knew that the crew was in danger. So she decided to be careful and avoid the wreck itself. She was trying to be very gentle and make sure and see who all was on the ship, is like if they were in the water. When the ship parted, she did see the prince sink into the waves. And she thought, well, now he'll be with me. And then she remembered that he couldn't live underwater. So she actually decides to rescue him. His eyes were closed. He was not dead, but he was close to, and she held his head above the water and kind of helped the waves drift them away. In the morning, the storm was gone, and the he had like more color coming back to his face. He wasn't as knocked out, plain cold. And she, being obsessed with this man, decided to kiss his forehead and kind of touch his hair. And she kind of was putting him akin to the statue that she had come across in her gardens. After he got to the beach, there was some bells that sounded. There was a bunch of little girls who like came into the garden. She swam out further and away so people wouldn't see her. She tried to cover her head with the sea foam so that her face couldn't be seen. And she kind of watched. She saw the girls approach the prince, and they looked a little scared, but they fetched other people, and the mermaids saw that the prince came to life, which is likely just CPR getting the water out of him, and smiled. He smiled like thankfully around at everybody. And then we all know what happens, when he's on the beach, which this is pretty standard to the actual story. But I think this story gets weirder.
They do a lot of description in this story.
Yeah, they really paint the picture in this story a lot. In this version, it looks like the Little Mermaid essentially kind of inquired why they can't live under the sea and if they were immortal. And the old lady explains that they have to die. There's a term of life for human beings. She compares it to green seaweed that has once been cut off and can never flourish again. They have a soul which lives forever, but their body will turn to dust.
Mm-hmm. And the mermaids are soulless, but they live for 300 years.
Correct. And she says that she would gladly give all hundreds of years she has to live to be a human for just one day. And the old lady's like, no, 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 don't do that shit. Okay, so then Little Mermaid asks if there's anything she can do to win an immortal soul. She wants to be a soul. She wants to have a soul. She wants to be on the surface. And the old lady's like, no, unless a man were to love you so much that you were more to him than his father or mother, and if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, that his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain a share into the future of happiness of mankind. So essentially, with a recap, marry her.
Yes.
If he were to marry her, she would gain an immortal soul by sharing his soul through love. And, the Little Mermaid's kind of upset, and she's like, I want to be, or the old lady's like, let us be happy. Let us be happy with our 300 years, which is quite long enough. And so that we can rest, and so that, whatever. They have like a ball underwater.
Yes.
And these huge castles are made of like see-through crystal. There's like grassy greens. There's all kinds of stuff that looks really, really neat, actually. And it's just kind of one of those things she'll never have up, on Earth. If she goes up on the surface, she just won't have any of that. And then she goes to see the sorceress, who's got like the whirlpools, right?
Yeah, she sneaks out of the ball when everybody was distracted and heads to
Right,
the sea witch, the
right.
sorceress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then, we all know what the sea witch does here. Little Mermaid shows up and is like, hey, this is what I want. And the sea witch is like, obviously, I know what you want. You're stupid as hell for doing it. And she's like, you know what? But I can figure it out. We can make a deal. She says, when you become a human being, you cannot be a mermaid. You can never return to the water with your sisters or to the palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, that he is so willing to forget his father and mother for your sake and to love you with his whole soul, you will become foam on the crest of the waves when your heart breaks and he marries another. So
Mhm.
if this prince ever gets married, she will essentially become the foam of the sea and no longer exist. And
Yes.
the mermaid's like, fuck it, we ball. She's like, sign me up right now. And the witch is like, yeah, but you got to pay me with your voice. And she's like, hang on. How do I manage that? How do I woo this man without a voice? And in essential terms, in the way that Ursula sings it in the movie, there's body language, so she just sends this girl off into the abyss of the ocean with feetsies and no voice. So she
Yeah,
comes up into the side. Yeah, go ahead.
she gives her a potion to turn her tail into legs, but she only has within like 24 hours to go up to the surface and do it. And to take her voice, she cuts out the Little Mermaid's tongue with a knife.
Yeah, so it's not as easy as just
Yeah.
stealing her voice. She just you don't get shit.
And of course, with every new wish you get, like she gets legs, but as she walks on these legs, there feels like to her like she's being stabbed through them with swords.
Yeah, yeah, lots of pain. The witch says basically that it's gonna hurt, and she finds out that each time she takes a step, it's like needles or knives poking into her. But she's very proud of herself. She keeps going, she keeps moving.
Yep.
But she could not speak or sing, even in the most beautiful palace. Her being the most beautiful creature in all of her clothes that they give. There was beautiful female slaves apparently, which is horrendous. But these women were dressed in like silks and golds, and they sang in front of the prince and the king and queen. And the mermaid kind of misses her voice. She's kind of like, "Oh, if only I had been able to show him that I could sing." So that's our first real regret we feel here with not having the voice. And the the prince said she should remain with him always, and she received permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. So that's the way the story is headed. What a vibe. There was a page's dress made for her, so that she could accompany him on horseback. They rode all the time. There was little birds that sang, and she enjoyed that. She would climb atop the prince to the tops of the high mountains. Her feet bled with steps, even though they were marked up. She just laughed and followed him, which is wild. And when the whole house was asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps because it eased the burning of her feet. And she would also bathe them in cold seawater. And she thought of her family. One night, she witnessed her sisters come up arm in arm, and they were singing sorrowfully. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her and told her how she had grieved them. And after that, they came to the same place every night and once saw in the distance her old, kind grandmother, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old sea king, her father, with the crown on his head, and they all stretched their hands out toward her but did not venture near land because, they were all hesitant of land. She began to love the prince, which is great. He loved her as he would love a little child, but never came into his head to make her his wife yet. And unless he married her, she could not receive his immortal soul, obviously. On the morning after his marriage with another, she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. That sounds awful. And do you not love me the best of them all, is what her eyes seemed to say when he kissed her on the forehead. And he admitted that she was dear to him, that she had the best heart, and she's devoted. And he's like, you look like somebody familiar that I've seen once that like saved me, but like I'll never see her again. Just like right to her face. And
She
oh my,
recalls saving him that day.
yeah. Yeah, and then she basically is very dramatic way of being like, yeah, that was me, homie, and you don't know. Um, ew. Okay, and then he's like, I gotta go. My parents want me to meet this beautiful princess. Like, I'll be back, I guess. But they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her. She is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. So once again, is like, you look kind of like this hoe, but I don't think you are this hoe. And then is like, I'm gonna go meet this other chick though. I'll be back.
Yeah, he thought she looked like the girl that resuscitated him.
Yeah. Well, and then the issue here, you are not afraid of the sea, my dumb child, said he. I hate that. Hated that. I'm not a fan of that.
He calls her a dumb child a lot.
That's a problem. I hate that. Yep. So anyways, she sat on the deck of a ship and thought she could see her father's castle and her aged grandmother and the tide. She was like looking through the tide of the vessel, and her sisters came up on the waves and gazed mournfully, and she beckoned to them and smiled and wanted them to know how happy she was, but the cabin boy approached and they dove down, so she could no longer see them again. The ship sailed into the harbor, no princess though, she wasn't there yet. And then when she finally did come, the Little Mermaid was like, oh fuck, she's like pretty and shit, which is unfortunate for our heroine here. Oh my god. It was you, said the prince, who saved my life when I lay dead on the beach, he said, and held his blushing bride in his arms. Oh, I am too happy, said he to the Little Mermaid. My fondest hopes are fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere. The Little Mermaid kissed his hand and felt as if her heart were already broken. What a vibe. This man's wild. His wedding morning would bring death to her, and she would change into the foam of the sea. The church bells rung. Heralds rode across town to proclaim the betrothal. Man, this man was like, you know what? I'm not marrying this hoe. And then he showed up and was like, oh, I'm marrying this hoe. Like, what kind of vibes?
It's because she turned out to be the one that saved him from the temple.
Yep.
It's like, I won't marry anybody else but this one person.
Yeah.
Shows up that one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, on the same evening, the bride and the bridegroom went on a board ship. There was cannons firing, flags waving, and she knew that this was the end for her. She would die because this would be the morning of the wedding, that she would just be like, oh shit, guess I'm gone. The prince kissed his bride while she played with his raven hair, and they went arm in arm to the rest of the splendid tent, and blah, 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 blah. And the Little Mermaid is upset. She's got her picturesque, perfect, like, I'm going to sit on the edge of the ship and cry about it thing. And her sisters come up, and they're like, yo, our hair's gone. So these girls are either bald or it's choppy. Like Angela's... what was the fucking name? What was the name of that? Angelica on Rugrats, her doll, Cynthia. That's what I'm picturing right now. Okay. They gave their hair to the witch so that they could help her. Before the sun rises, the Little Mermaid has to kill her man, and she'll stay alive, and his blood will essentially form into the tail that she needs, and she'll become a mermaid. So, like, got some choices to make.
Yeah.
He has to die before sunrise. That's a lot to ask of her.
Yeah, to kill her man that she loved, or die herself.
Yeah. So then Little Mermaid goes into the tent, right? She's like, yo, those two was fucking. Okay. So these two did some shit. And she sees that the bride is like laying on the prince's chest. So Little Mermaid naturally leans down and like kisses this man on the forehead. And then he whispers the name of the bride while he's dreaming. And the Little Mermaid's like, you know what? We're not going to kill this man. So she throws the knife into the waves. Okay.
They cut off their hair for nothing.
What a time to be alive. And I guess it turns like a red, like in the water, and it spurts up like blood. And she looks at the prince and then throws herself from the ship into the sea and thinks her body's dissolving into foam. But she doesn't feel like she's dying. The bright sun all around her, red clouds in the sky. The speech was melodious. She's like, where am I? What's happening? And there's a lady that's like among the daughters of the air. A mermaid has not an immortal soul, nor can she obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the power of another hangs her eternal destiny. But the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can by their good deeds procure one for themselves. We fly to warm countries and cool the sultry air and destroys mankind with pestilence. We carry the perfume of the flowers to spread health and restoration. After we have striven for 300 years to all of our good and power, we receive an immortal soul and take into the happiness of mankind. You, poor little mermaid, have tried your whole heart to do as we are doing. You have suffered and endured and raised by yourself to the spirit world by your good deeds. And now, by striving for 300 years in the same way, you may obtain an immortal soul. So all of that! And she still got an immortal soul. What a pro.
Not yet.
She's allowed to obtain one.
Yes.
But, the goal has been the same, and these ladies are like, you know what, here we go. She looks down and she sees the prince and his bride, like, dancing and having a great time. She looks at the pearly foam where she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of the bride and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud and floated into the ether. After 300 years, thus we shall float into the kingdom of heaven, and we may even get there sooner. Unseen can we enter the houses of men where there are children, and for every day we find a good child, who is the joy of his parents and deserves our love, or time of probation is shorted. The child does not know when we fly through the room that we smile with joy at his good conduct, for we can count one less year of our 300 years. But when we see a naughty or wicked child, we shed tears of sorrow, and for every tear a day is added to our time of trial. What? Okay, So, fuck, bro. This girl went through some shit.
Yeah.
Imagine a brisk wind just going through your fucking house. A brisk wind, and you've done sentenced this fucking air child to fucking 6 years because you don't know how to act. She spelled 6 tears, so she gets 6 years. Wildin'.
It has a day for every tear. Yeah, she went from mermaid to human to child of the air.
Bro. And she, like, became a human and was like, I got this shit. And then this motherfucker was like, I ain't gonna marry nobody because I really kind of like you. Like, I think it will be fine. It'll be fine. And then he shows up and he's like, just fucking kidding. I've been here 2 seconds. It's wedding time. Yep. It's like, huh? What a time to be alive.
Yeah, he was the one she wanted, but he wanted the girl from the temple that she delivered him to save him.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was almost like Hans Christian Andersen is like, oh yeah, this is supposed to be a children's fairy tale. Let me just add in children gotta be good to help the children of the daughters of the air get their souls faster.
Mm-hmm.
He just added that at the very end. I was like, oh.
Wow.
But that is the short and quick version of The Little Mermaid.
Yeah. I don't know how we're feeling, but
I like the story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bunch of free podcasts and audiobooks of this one out there. And this telling brought forth newer media of it.
Mm-hmm.
It keeps continuing and evolving. Some of the media that I know of is Disney's Little Mermaid.
Uh-huh.
There's also a anime of it. It's the Hans Christian Andersen, The Little Mermaid. It's a Japanese anime from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks, patron members of Mondi, Mage, and Ruby.
Thank you very much, you kind souls that are definitely not trapped here.
Any news, Kaotic?
Book podcast is currently on hold because I just don't have time to edit, and In Case of Monsters Break Glass is kind of on hold as well, just because my time is very limited right now with having 3 jobs. So once haunt season's over, I'll definitely have a little bit more time to myself, hopefully, and be able to do some things. So everything's kind of a hot mess at the moment. That's my bad.
Nah, I've been busy as well, so with farming, harvest season.
Yes, life happens.
Fun. October's always busy. That's why we try and do more relaxed specials.
Mm-hmm.
Well then, with that, Kaotic with the outro.
Thank you for listening to the Monsters, Myths, and Mayhem podcast. Silver and Kaotic take you into the depth of the lore and discuss how these legends could affect modern-day society. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or almost any podcast service easiest to you. Dive into the depths of chaos with us every Wednesday, bar Silver and Kaotic not missing their scheduling, and consider joining the podcast Discord or Twitter following even more insider looks and even some D&D sessions. If you'd like some extra special inside looks or even want to be a guest on the show, consider helping us via Patreon. Your help makes such a big difference to us both. Until next time, Mythics, you never know what kind of mayhem we might get into.